edition from Colin Moss.
Hey.
We're here on a Sunday afternoon, 3:15 p.m. Ready for a good question.
All right. Well,
Colin.
Today I'd like to talk to you guys about Fight Club, the movie. I think I saw a recent interview with David Fincher in Rolling Stone magazine, and they were talking about Fight Club, and it made me think of, oh wow, what a great topic for our podcast. Three therapist guys talking about what they see when they see Fight Club now, or also maybe what they saw in it when they were younger. Mm-hmm. So, Andy, Jason, take it away.
What was the article? Where was it from?
Rolling Stone. Actually, it was an article about the Rolling Stone article because Paul Thomas Anderson did not like Fight Club, and he said something bad about David Fincher, who directed Fight Club, who also directed Seven. He directed what was it, another one?
I wasn't a fan of Seven.
Yeah, but something else that wasn't too nice to women. Like at the end of Seven, he cuts off the wife's head and puts it in a box.
Really? I watched half of it and I was like, oh, I'm not into this.
But he also did a bunch of music videos back in the 80s.
Oh.
Like he did a lot of famous musicians, music videos. Anyway, he hated the movie. He said he wished David Fincher would get testicular cancer after seeing
Chuck said that?
No. Paul Thomas Anderson.
Okay.
He directed, I think at the time his movie Magnolia was coming out. Also, what a crazy year for movies. The Matrix, the first Phantom Menace, Star Wars. You had Fight Club, Magnolia. I loved. There was a couple others. Like 99 was a crazy year.
Yeah. That's interesting. I what I love about this is that, I think the last time I saw Fight Club was when I was in early 20s. Probably.
Yeah, probably like 10 years ago I saw it. Maybe even further, 15 years ago.
But like we both own the DVDs. Mm-hmm. Jason, do you have the DVD?
I do not.
No.
Wait, no, that's not true. I do have the DVD. I've forgotten about it because it's been at the bottom of my bin, for a minute.
Okay, here's the question. Did y'all have the posters?
No,
I never had the poster. I was never the poster Fight Club guy.
No. The theatrical release, I think, was considered not a flop, but not successful. And it did not achieve any success until its DVD release.
Okay, I want to talk about that first. So in the most recent WTF interview with Mark Maron, the podcast with Brad Pitt and Leo, Brad talks about the premiere of Fight Club. And I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but I looked it up. I heard it like a while back. But so it was somewhere overseas, somewhere like in another country at a film festival. And Edward Norton and Brad Pitt had smoked a J, and they like got really high, and they were there like watching the premiere, and it was in subtitles. And so anyway, in the interview, Brad Pitt's talking about like how with subtitles it didn't like really get the humor across, and like no one laughed at any of the jokes. And so he and Edward Norton the entire time were cracking up because they were like, no one gets this. This is going to be a flop. Oh my God, this is like crazy. And then whenever Marla says, I haven't been fucked like that since grade school, the guy who owned or who put on the festival left the theater. And they were just like so high. And they was like, oh my God, that's crazy. So anyway, yeah. It totally flopped at the beginning, and
I saw it in the theater. My best friend, Case Kearns, was like, he saw it in the theater, and maybe even earlier in the day, he's like, dude, we got to go see this movie. You're gonna love it. And like we went, there's a movie theater on Riverside, East Riverside. It's not even there anymore, I'm pretty sure. But
you were in Austin at the time.
Austin, yeah, living in Austin. I was 23. Yeah. It was a good year. 99 was a good year for me, and I remember watching the movie in that theater, and we were the only ones. There was nobody else in that theater. Just not a lot of people went and saw it in the theater.
So what do you think it was that about that movie and about being a 20-something dude that grabs 20-something dudes? Because I have to say that when I watched it when I was 20 years old, it certainly hit different than it does now that I'm like 42.
Mm-hmm.
It feels less, I don't know, it feels less interesting now.
Oh, okay.
Is that cruel? That's, I don't know.
I found it more. I found I was able to sink my teeth into the movie more, having a little bit more worldly knowledge, having lived 20 years since its release, you know, looking deeper and also knowing what I know as a therapist. But I've read the book, and I've read other books by this author, Chuck Palahniuk. But I was talking to my wife earlier today about it when the movie was book and the book came out, like the progressive left side of the political spectrum loved the anti-capitalism message
for sure. Mm-hmm.
And then now it's more like the alt-right, you know, like toxic like hyper masculine, Proud Boy, you know, type disaffected libertarian conservative leaning males are like, yeah, Fight Club. I mean, I know it's kind of a generalization, but it's funny how it swings. And I'm more like, yeah, but what about, I think it's a love story. Like it's a crazy love story.
Tell me about that. Tell me what you think about that.
It ends with the two of them holding hands, watching this thing. You know what I mean? Like it's his journey, and I was reading an article, and they were like, everyone focuses on Brad Pitt's character, you know?
For sure.
But really, like someone wrote that Marla Singer, played by Helena Bonham Carter, brilliantly portrayed by her, is the most important character in the whole story. So I had to watch it with really paying attention to her and her relationship and how she affects him. And cause I mean, it's cringeworthy to watch in our current.
It is. Is she his conscience? And what I mean by that, there's this interesting moment in the movie where he's doing his emotional vampirism, right? Where he is going to these you know, the self-help groups or the you know, the cancer groups and connecting with the idea of death with other people that are actually in the middle of having to confront death for real.
Yeah.
And so he's having his cry, and it cures his insomnia, right? Where he's let go of this thing and now can sleep. And then when he's confronted by her doing the same thing, he runs into her and she's doing the same stuff. It ruins it for him. And he can no longer.
Her lie reflected my lie.
Yeah.
Quote that I love.
Yeah. Her lie reflected my, exactly. So like, and I was wondering if in some way
that's his conscience.
He's his conscience.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I'm so excited we're talking about this. So I'm not quite sure, and I'm going to use the wrong lingo or vocabulary using like describing this, but I think that like Edward Norton is the self. He's the self. He's like, so when you imagine like yourself witnessing your emotions of anxiety and depression and whatnot, that's Edward Norton's character, right? I think that Marla is as made believe as Brad Pitt, Tyler. They're both Tyler, but Tyler. I mean, they weren't allowed to be in the same room at the same time. And the feminine and the masculine. They're both wearing the same black feather
oh yeah
shirt. Yeah.
I didn't catch that till just now.
And so I see it as that Brad Pitt is the Jungian shadow to Edward Norton. And the reason why, and I did some research on this. So I think that Chuck Pollinuk, is that how you say last?
I've always said Palanahuk, but I could be mispronounced. That's how I've always pronounced it there.
We'll meet in the middle on Chuck.
Chuck.
Good old Chuck.
Chuck.
Loved Jung, and there's like a lot of quotes from about Jung from Chuck. So I wrote a few of them down. So he said, maybe the only thing each of us can see is our own shadow. Carl Jung called this his shadow work. He said, we never see others. Instead, we only see aspects of ourselves that fall over them, shadows, projections, or associations. The same way old painters would sit in a tiny dark room and trace the image of what stood outside of a tiny window in the bright sunlight, the camera obscura. Not the exact image, but everything reversed or upside down. Yeah. So
Brad Pitt's character is the shadow, and I guess so is Marla.
But that's what I'm saying. Yeah, but so is Marla, because
well, she's another aspect of his personality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, and it's interesting because if she is his, like, maybe his conscience, or if she represents something that what does it mean in those moments where his shadow is fucking her?
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't know about it, or he's not allowed to be there, or he's like put in the other room. Like, I don't even know what that means, but it feels like it should mean something.
Okay. So Robert Johnson, the author, talks about, I don't know the exact term, but it's internal incest. And what that means is your internal characters speaking to one another. So if you're talking about like internal family systems, or like, you know, what does my anxiety say to my depression? What does my depression say to my anger? All of that would be kind of summed up in their intimacy together. If you consider it like a shadow character of, you know, Edward Norton is like so cut off from femininity and masculinity. He's just like gone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's especially cruel to her, though.
He's especially cruel to her because, as we mentioned off camera, I think there could be a Fight Club 2 movie or book that would be exploring the femininity, because Fight Club, the movie, is all masculinity, chaos.
Mayhem, Project Mayhem.
Project Mayhem. And Marla is caught in the dust, and she's just kind of like, oh, what was that one quote? I wrote it down. She goes, I wish I could win with you, I think is what she said.
I can never win with you. I can never win with you. And then walks out.
To Edward Norton and walked off. But like, if she's a shadow character, that's like she's competing against Brad Pitt, which means like a sequel to Fight Club would be so cool.
He's totally shut off his access to his femininity.
Yeah.
And what we mean by femininity, just to name, right, is and by the way, I struggle with this because I think it's kind of bullshit, the genderizing of some of these things, like nurturing and kindness and compassion and love.
Let's just say traditionally categorized as feminine and masculine.
Yes.
Not necessarily.
And I think that's, I really struggle, by the way, and this is a little tangent, but I think it's important. I struggle with that in grad school a great deal because there's a lot, as being one of the few males in a lot of my class.
For sure. Me too.
You know, it'd be me and 22 women. And oftentimes there would be like these statements about, you know, men versus women. And it would be couched in these same tropes of like, you know, the nurture versus the fighting and the, you know, the protector stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because I feel like I inhabit both easily. And I think we all do. And I've seen, you know, gendered people in the world that inhabit both of these things. And so I don't know that I love the idea of, I like the idea of the main character then embodying both and having a battle within him of having both of these aspects that are represented by Brad Pitt and Helena Bonham Carter. But I think that we all kind of have this thing inside of us.
Sure.
We have the capacity for both things. All of us, humans.
The capacity is there. It's just society tells us what we can and can't do,
or where we're supposed to lean into,
right? Or we have guilt or shame. Yeah. So that's I like y'all's take on the Marla, you know, as a part of him, you know, part of the narrator, this, you know, of the Edward Norton character. I had a different take. I thought of it as a love story, and I didn't come to that conclusion until the end when they're holding hands as the buildings are exploding.
Oh man, I want to reply to that in, like later. That's like perfect. That's so cool. Yeah.
Okay. Well, to me, this is more like a identity and existential journey he goes on with like an anti-capitalist message, and the hyper masculinity was supposed to be satire that people just still don't get, and it's hard not to see it. You know, like I'm like, I don't know, it's kind of fun to watch people fight in Fight Club and get into it. I'm like, yeah. I mean, there's a reason why the UFC is popular and boxing is popular, and just, you know, it's the subjugation of that desire to externalize this internal conflict that we have. Anyway, tangent. I know. Masculation themes during this existential journey, constantly, like the testicular cancer, the castration. Meatloaf's character has breast from hormone therapy.
Meatloaf is in this. This is crazy.
Meatloaf is awesome.
That's awesome.
That Meatloaf was in this, but like constantly, like he's constantly worried about his genitalia being removed, or like that's the threat that they use against other people. I feel like it's about connection. Like Edward Norton's character is just cut off from the world at the beginning. He's living this like bachelor life, traveling all over the country, has this horrible job. We can even get into that. I don't even have time for that. But he goes to these support groups to like have this release so he can sleep, because he can't sleep. This is the plot of the movie that we're kind of walking through. And he says the line that people really listen to you when they think you're dying. And I'm like, Edward Norton, his guy just wanted people to listen to him, to connect, to be seen, to be heard. And then when Marla came through, and you know, the Marla singer, when she came through and the line was, her lie reflected my lie, then he didn't have access to that connection, and it wasn't working for him anymore. And then he kind of goes off in this dissociative identity disorder, you know, where his brain splits, which is, as therapists, we know that's bullshit. That doesn't happen like that. You don't get DID from insomnia, but as a literary tool, it was interesting. So he goes through like this hero's journey. He descends into madness, and he comes out on the other end kind of whole,
right?
By shooting himself in the head, basically committing, you know, a version of suicide. But the one thing I noticed in this movie that I never really put it together was what starts him questioning his reality as far as the Brad Pitt character was when he got in the car and they had that car accident. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Really had to let go.
He had let go, but also when the car accident happened, so his job in the movie is he's like he works for a car company, and he's supposed to go to these accidents all over the country and decide whether they do a recall, right?
Oh yeah.
So he has this moment at the car accident, which is kind of the turning point. I forget what the line was, but he says he's starting to feel what it feels like for the victims of the car accidents that he goes and sees. He's starting empathy, and his empathy and connection is what kind of makes him, kind of rounds out his journey to becoming whole again.
There's an irony in what you said earlier that's been sticking with me, and that is where you were talking about it's only when people think that you're going to die that they listen to you.
Yeah.
When in actuality, I think the purpose of the movie is the realization that we're all dying. We're all going to die. This death, that's the one certainty. And it's like, it's this bad faith life that we lead, in which we ignore the truth of the fact that we all have a death sentence.
Yeah. And the capitalist theme is like, so what we fill it up with IKEA, and at the time it was like IKEA magazines, you know, this is pre-Amazon days.
Yeah.
Like looking at the IKEA magazine.
And said, oh, I kind of want that one table, please.
Like how much effort that was to order stuff, you know, through a catalog. But yeah, having this knowledge of we will all die and it's absurd, and we also have to live between now and then. And so like assuaging that dread, that's the existential theme. Like, you know, what do we do with that? And in late 90s, early 2000s, it was let's buy a bunch of stuff.
But for sure, back in the 90s, it was like all about brand names and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, and then my wondering then is, does he provide an adequate enough solution? In other words, by losing your individualism, which is what he's kind of proposing, of like you're no longer special. You're now the part of the masses, and get to toiling, you know, part of the masses. We need to go back to this pre-agrarian society of, you know, hunter-gatherer stuff.
Right.
Is that an adequate solution to the fact that we're going to die and we're aware of it and there's nothing we can do to stop it?
So I saw it as this is the huge shift from 20s to 34-year-old Andy. Is I saw it as all about consumerism and all of that back then, and fighting and testosterone back then. But that's just Tyler's story that represents the idea of a shadow figure of like, what about the opposite? Can we make it whole? So is how I'm trying to say this. So the shadow is kind of like, that's what's unconscious. It's what you wouldn't like think about normally. It's like in the unconscious right there. And so I feel like the story of the chaos and the story of going to zero with the money is just the content of the process of like encountering the shadow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Well, isn't he? And maybe what you're saying, and I'm going to say it out loud so you can hear and make sure that I'm following. Is it that he is forcing you to look at the shadow? That's what the movie is about. Like that's what all the homework assignments are.
That's what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
It's what it's about. And going back to what you're talking about, Colin, the shadow for Fight Club the movie was movement and doing things and going out and being proactive with your life. And so if you look at the anima and the animus, the anima is connection and eros. Animus is logos. That's the masculine. So anima is connection and love and feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Animus is logos and structure and action. Mm-hmm. So this movie was about action and fighting and going and warrior and doing and being. But in the end, he's with Marla. And so in the end, it's the anima, it's the connection, it's the support groups.
Mm-hmm.
It's
even the Project Mayhem, the team, the guys all together.
Yeah.
Not being alone.
And after he left Marla, he stopped going to the support groups. He stopped connecting with others, right? So he lost that eros, that feminine. And we talk about like, you know, what is feminine, what is masculine. It's best to think about it in terms of like eros and logos, which is love and logic. And so in the end, he chose connection. And so it is a love story.
Which actually is a poignant thing, right? Yeah. Like there is, because if when we're staring into the void, right? When we're standing at the edge, which is kind of the imagery at the end of the movie where they're in that building kind of looking off as the explosions are going off. It's also staring at, you know, into the abyss, into the unknown, but doing it hand in hand with somebody.
Yeah.
That's not nothing. That's like, there's something real fundamental that they're getting at.
That shot was intentional for sure. Holding hands while the world looks like it's ending right in front of you.
I mean, that's how I feel about therapy. I mean, candidly, I feel like that's a big part of my job as my clients, creep up to the edge and stare over into the abyss is, that tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, I'm standing here right next to you, that we're looking together.
But you're not alone.
You're not alone.
And we're surprised together. Like at the very end, whenever the buildings fell, you saw Edward Norton and Marla turn around and they were like, whoa, what happened? And that's when they held hands. It's like they were both jolted.
Which, by the way, I just had a thought about how this relates to the pandemic, actually, because the pandemic has forced us all as therapists to encounter our own impermanence, right? Like we're in this global tragedy where, we're all experiencing the same thing as our client, and it's peeling away at our ability to act like, oh, that's just the client's thing. That's not something I'm experiencing too. And that's also why I think a lot of therapists are really struggled throughout the pandemic of having to look at this thing in the face and say, oh shit, I'm experiencing the same thing with them. And so we are actually standing together at the edge, looking into the abyss together. And it's not just me watching a movie of you doing it and I'm safely over here. It's no, we're actually in this, which is why I think that there is that article that I saw floating around the internet this week around the vast number of burnout from therapists that's going on right now. It's because we don't pretend anymore. We're having to face it.
Right. The article that was in Forbes, right, talking about the next wave of the pandemic will be like the mental health wave coupled with the therapist burnout that's happening.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is, I can see that for sure.
It feels related to me, and maybe I could be off, but yeah.
So what would be the shadow of what we're experiencing as therapists right now?
Tell me what you mean.
Well, what is it that we're repressing? Is it connection? What is it that we're not expressing that Tyler Durden would want us to say?
Our humanity, right? It's the getting down in it. It's the stepping down off your fucking pedestal for a second and being in it with the client. Because
this shit's scary. That this is all terrifying, and who knows when. I don't think the phrase "gets back to normal" makes any sense anymore anyway, but something like that, when we get to be together again, I guess.
Agreed. Because right now, if you have the money to spend it, you kind of are the IKEA guy. You're like, maybe I could use a better bar cart. Maybe I could use a better couch.
Oh yeah. If you're working, you're not spending money really, other than
you can't go travel, right? So you kind of are Edward Norton.
Right. Yeah, you're just filling it up with stuff to make you feel better.
And then thus, does that make therapists before the pandemic, before encountering our own humanity, does that make us the same emotional? Does that make us an emotional vampire in the same way that Edward Norton was going to those self-help groups?
Oh, speak more to that. That feels big.
I think,
talk about that.
I feel like there's times where I'm like, I can just put my stuff on pause and work with my clients and not deal with my own fears and anxiety right now. Let me just load up on client hours and just work really hard. And I noticed when I had some time off, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, this doesn't feel good. I want to keep working.
Yeah. That and that soothingness of being with other people and having it not be ours.
Yeah.
I'm in the testicular cancer meeting and I'm holding somebody and we're crying, but I don't have testicular cancer.
Right.
And I get to pretend like I'm not dying.
Right.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I don't know. That's a weird place to go, but it feels interesting and important. And maybe that's also a safety mechanism that we bring in.
And one of the big things that happened in the movie was that Edward Norton became aware of Brad Pitt, and whenever he was aware of Brad Pitt, it seemed to kind of feel more whole. It kind of seemed more balanced, and whereas at the beginning Brad Pitt was the badass savior of his life, Edward Norton then became the badass savior of Brad Pitt's life.
He became integrated.
He became integrated. That's the best way to put it.
He didn't like murder Brad Pitt and he completely went away and went back to himself. He kind of merged the two personalities at the end.
And that's the whole thing that Jung and everyone else talks about whenever they talk about the shadow, is the shadow is not always evil. The shadow is what is hidden.
Mm-hmm.
So Brad Pitt was great and beautiful and amazing at the beginning of the movie. And Edward Norton was, you look at him and you're like, oh, well, he just wants to be Brad Pitt, right? It twists where Brad Pitt's the villain in the end, and we want Edward Norton to kind of bring some normalcy to what's going on.
See, yes, but I don't ever felt like he was the villain necessarily. Like at the very end, and it took me 20 years to understand the line, or at least interpret it differently. That made sense. When Edward Norton is strapped to the chair and he puts the gun in his mouth,
mm-hmm.
and he says, "I want you to really listen to me. My eyes are open," or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, why did he say that? And then now I'm like, it's because Brad Pitt showed up to teach him something, and now his eyes are open, and now he sees the world for what it is, and now he doesn't need Brad Pitt anymore, and he's gone. And
There's like a metaphor that I've been using past couple weeks with clients, and it's so fitting for this. I love New York more than any other city not because of the fashion or the music or the culture or anything. That's all great. But it's because you see the huge vastness of like human emotion within the city. So you go down the subway,
mm-hmm.
you will see someone crying,
mm-hmm.
and you will like
mm-hmm.
reflect back on your own heartbreak. You'll get on the subway, you'll go across town, and across town you'll like get out and you'll be in Central Park, and you'll see a roller skate disco dance party with people, little kids like eating ice cream. And you in 30 minutes spanned across the town, and you also did in your emotions and in your heart. And it was only 30 minutes, but like you went all the way through this human experience, right? And if you compare that to a suburb, a stereotypical suburb, where there are parents who put the problems under the rug. We don't talk about everything that's going on. We just put it under the rug. That's where neurosis comes from. That's where anxiety comes from. That's where not accepting who you are comes from. And that was Edward Norton's path at the beginning of the movie. And Brad Pitt was like, no, life is more dense. It's like a thick chocolate cake,
So in the interest of time.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is going to be one of our longer ones.
I know. I
wanted to point out the typical conversation around Fight Club is usually about the hypermasculinity, toxic masculinity, and that's perfect conversation for another time. I think our conversation was a little bit more interesting than that, because it's we're diving into deeper territory and maybe unfamiliar territory to people who may be listening to this. So I really appreciate that you guys went there. Any final thoughts?
No, I feel like I feel like we could keep going on this for a long time, but I like what we touched on today for sure.
Me too.
I really do think that it was a movie that was intended to have Marla and Brad Pitt as inner characters.
I love that idea.
And when you watch it with that,
how about instead of a sequel, instead of Fight Club 2, it's more like Fight Club through Marla's eyes.
Oh, that would be
like redo the whole movie through her point of view.
That'd be amazing.
I don't know. I would see that for sure.
Inside Out by Pixar, but Marla.
Or like, how there was Beowulf and then someone wrote Grendel,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you. As always, this was wonderful. Yeah. We will do this again sometime soon. All right.
I'm always waiting for your photos. I'm always waiting and waiting for you to